Hi everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Danny Sanger, Certified Life Coach, NLP Master Practitioner and also trained as a senior member of the Synergist team. In this series I've been going through some of the commonly asked questions that are typically asked when I talk through the coaching work that I do, and in this particular episode I'm going to hone in on the sports profession, and more specifically I'm going to talk through what the typical challenges are that a footballer would experience as part of their journey as a footballer. So I'm using the footballer example because that's where my background within the sports domain is more extensive. If you haven't already, please do look back at my previous videos for context and understanding of the broader range of clients that I actually work with. But within the sporting space, very much I've had a lot more exposure with footballers. And the examples that I'm going to provide you with as part of today's session, they do very much apply to other similar sporting professions as well. So although I will be talking to you with examples around the footballers' experiences, for example, they will equally apply to a boxer as well, to more or less of an extent. So if I start with footballers then and start at the earlier end of their career, the earlier stages, with footballers typically their life journey as a footballer begins quite early on as children. Pretty much it's not uncommon for it to be as early as 5 or 6 years of age, joining a local club. And it's at that stage very much obviously a family investment in terms of time and dedication, with a lot of these players coming from less privileged backgrounds as well. There's a lot of high hopes and aspirations and investment made as a family in hoping that the individual, the child, will progress and succeed as a professional player. Now, that might be a son or a daughter, obviously, and there's a lot of pressure to apply on a child at such an early age where they're only just starting out their journey in terms of developing as adults, let alone already then trying to line up themselves to become professionals of a particular sporting field, which will be many years of hard work and focus. So you can already imagine the amount of pressure that's placed on the individual, the child themselves, and then hand in hand with that, because of the amount of focus and time spent concentrating on football and football related activities, there's not a great deal of time left in terms of energy and focus for other key elements of personal development that are crucial typically for a child as part of them developing into adults. So education is just one aspect, and although they will progress through school as is mandatory up until the age of 16, in terms of aspiring to succeed and go over and above in terms of the educational goals and targets, that's very much left to the wayside, and focus is on football as the expected avenue that they will take. So education becomes more of a secondary thought, in essence. And then in addition to that, you've then got also the amount of attention and time spent by the family in activities which are centered around football. So outside of education itself, in terms of other key development activities that are typically associated with children growing up, from social to other pastimes which are complementary to what they get from school, these are often then foregone because though that particular time slot is taken up by football or football related activities. So as you can imagine, as the child is progressing through that earlier stage of their career as a footballer, with everything very much invested in and relying upon them succeeding as a sports professional, come the age of 16, 17 and 18, when that time, critical time comes for them to progress from an academy into a club, I'm going to talk through a couple of scenarios here. So the first one, taking the worst case scenario here, is that the individual isn't selected by a club, and given the amount of time that was invested in football and not very much else spent on doing other activities outside of the football arena, there aren't many options that are left available if they don't make it into football. So one common and unfortunate scenario that exists here is that the individual leans towards what might be then easier options, but unfortunately negative choices in terms of a career in sort of crime or criminal activities, getting exposed to drugs, and that tends to often just spiral off the back of a depressed mindset because of all their hopes being vested in becoming a footballer, and that when that doesn't happen, there is a huge drop, obviously, and that will then channel its way through into negative pastimes or other options, which unfortunately are decided upon. And that then brings its own sort of set of issues further down the line. So that's where a program like myself, which I provide, and my method is targeted in a very unique way that it ensures that if I am able to partner up earlier on with a younger player and their family, so this is more of a relationship I have with the family as a whole, where we understand what the chances are, and it's not a pessimistic view, but it's about understanding the likelihood of succeeding and doing an initial evaluation of what it's going to take to succeed and what other parts of the child's personal life are equally important, not just as a fallback option in case they don't make it, but actually complementary to ensure they are able to perform optimally on the pitch. So it's that very much a balance of having a successful life outside of football, which feeds into them being that much more focused and that much more successful, and more importantly, that much more confident as a player, and that much more confident to then deal with any mishaps that may occur further down the line, including, in the worst case scenario, not making it through into a club. Now, that's one scenario. The other more positive scenario is that the players do succeed and they make it into a club and progress their journey further into the sports world. And that in itself is great, obviously, but then there are challenges as young adults who have, as I've mentioned before, they missed quite key components of their growing up, if you like, whilst succeeding as a footballer. The usual stresses and strains that we all typically experience from time to time as part of our journey in life, they are less, if you like, conditioned or prepared to be able to deal with them more effectively, not having had that development opportunity that the rest of us typically will have had the opportunity to achieve. So if you can imagine, then even something as basic as managing finances, when a player becomes that much more successful and starts to earn a lot more than they're used to, and a relationship that they may already have a predetermined relationship that they've got with money, an ability to manage money, invest, and everything else around money, that's often something that, if not thought through carefully, can be a disaster further down the line, to want for a better phrase, because thinking about the career duration of a footballer, although the more successful ones will earn a lot of money, there is only a smaller time window in which they will earn those kinds of amounts of income. And they've got, we're talking up until the age of 35, 36, maybe late 30s, typically at best, up until when they will then retire and have obviously a very lengthy rest of life, all being well, of which then they want to continue maintaining the type of lifestyle that they've developed for themselves, and obviously needing to have the right types of finances in place to ensure that they can sustain that kind of a lifestyle. And that, in essence, is where something needs to be done further forward and upfront as part of planning and managing the income at the time they're actually receiving it, as opposed to becoming an afterthought and something that they then have to deal with as a consequence when they retire from the game. So that's an example around finances. But as they succeed, they will have relationships, they will have, marriages or partners, and there's obviously a whole element of communicating dealing and having effective, constructive relationships outside and on the pitch as well. So having the experience of dealing with different personalities, dealing with conflict and resolving conflict effectively, communication, through to then becoming family men or family women, supporting a family and dedicating time to family as much as they are dedicating to their sports career. That's a balancing act which can be very challenging, and often in this industry it becomes that the personal life is a sacrifice in order for the football career to succeed. And often the sacrifice doesn't become apparent until later on down the line, post retirement. So, with the kind of program that I run, it's very much targeted as being preventative to those sorts of scenarios existing or surfacing. And if they were to, it's about making sure that the individual that I'm working with, my client, is better prepared and to deal with the issues or challenges successfully, as opposed to those becoming costs which they have to incur and accumulate and then regardless inevitably have to deal with further down the line. So it's all very much about balancing their successful career and a very successful personal life in parallel. And in fact, again, similar theme as I've mentioned in terms of their sort of childhood years, is a very successful personal life would actually complement and support an even more successful professional career. So that's where my program comes in and helps to support and ensure there is that balance and connection between the two elements. And it's sort of a preventative approach, as well as obviously dealing with anything specific that comes up as a challenge that we can resolve, and resolve without too much commotion and too much public exposure as well. So I've talked about a couple of typical challenges or themes of challenges around relationships, family, responsibilities, the career itself, money, finances, and other habits that can typically develop as you go through. You have a social circle that expands and quite quickly can sort of go out of control if it's not kept in check, or there's not enough thought put around making sure you're investing the right amount of time, as you've only got a finite amount of time in the first place, ensuring you've got that time being evenly spread in the right areas of priority for you and what works for you in the longer run as well as in the shorter term. So all of that, which is then basically off the back of an underlying platform where these individuals will have typically missed that key element that builds up their foundation during their childhood years, because their focus has been on football and other elements have effectively become neglected and become an afterthought. So that's some of what will typically come through as a set of challenges as they're succeeding and becoming more successful as footballers. And then we get towards the end of their career. And in terms of the end of their career, then what I'm going to just touch upon just now is something that could happen as a premature end to their career through an injury or any other type of mishap, which means that although their career is always expected to be relatively short, as I mentioned, up until their late 30s at best, it can be cut a lot shorter than that through injuries or other mishaps, which means that then what they were expecting to be a very successful career has suddenly come to a standstill. That unfortunately can lead to depression, a lot of dwelling on what if scenarios. What if I didn't go in for that tackle, or whatever it might be. There's a lot of focus being placed on the event that caused the end of their career, and that typically then leads to depression, and that can often then unfortunately lead on to other activities, drugs and what have you. So there are those types of challenges with these high demanding and highly successful careers that they would otherwise typically have. So an injury can take that career and put an end to it very suddenly and dramatically. But also there's an element where the injury itself is actually recovered from, in the sense that physically the player has actually come through and gone through rehabilitation, physiotherapy and so forth, and they're actually coming back stronger physically. But when you see what their performance is like on pitch, they're actually sub performing compared with how they performed before the injury. And that is very often down to a psychological issue, in the sense that they've had a big knock to their confidence. They have that sense of vulnerability, a realization of how fragile their career actually is, in the event that it was actually a career ending injury that they experienced. And that can then play its way through in terms of confidence and how they perform on the pitch. And again, that's where I might be brought in at the point of experiencing that injury and overcoming those types of challenges in confidence and what have you. Or better still, for me to have been brought on earlier on, knowing that this type of scenario may exist, and having the player primed already to help deal with and overcome such challenges and succeed at the other end, and actually perform better post-injury than they did beforehand. So that's sort of coming up to the end of a footballer's career. Now, post-career, there's some sets of challenges which are quite extensive, and I'm not going to go through all of them in great detail. One thing I would recommend you all do is, if you're interested to know more, there's a book that I often revisit and refer to. It's a book that I actually hand out at no cost to some of my clients who are interested to have a copy, and that's a book called Retired by Alan Gernon. It's brilliant. It's got it's not great in terms of, it's telling a bit of a sad story in terms of the fate of the vast majority of footballers. So statistically, there are a huge number of footballers that come out from what is otherwise a very successful career, but within only a few years post retirement, they're experiencing divorce, bankruptcy, depression, moving on in terms of getting into gambling debts, or getting into other activities in terms of criminal type of activities and so forth. Now, this is very much an outcome, as I've mentioned before, in terms of that balancing act of making sure your personal life is succeeding in parallel to the successes you're experiencing on the pitch itself. If that doesn't occur, and the thought process aren't being engaged earlier on whilst they're succeeding, this is where these types of statistics will start to surface, because at the end of the career, there may not have been a thought process put in place around, how am I going to sustain my lifestyle once I retire? How do I invest my finances or my income now, whilst I'm earning the kind of money I'm earning, so that it works for me when I retire? There are lots of distractions that surface, and your funds typically divert to those types of distractions whilst you're succeeding as a player, whether it's related to gambling or other vices, or just not very wise spending in some cases, which then leads to not having enough money at the other end to be able to sustain the type of lifestyle they wish to post-retirement. There's also then, in terms of divorce and relationship issues, because very much if they haven't been investing in the relationship with their partners and the family alongside their career, often when the career comes to an end, there's not a great deal of investment that's taken place in the relationships for them to be able to sustain and effectively help that to grow further post-retirement, and often it tends to fall apart. So again, that's an unfortunate statistic that we can see firsthand, and Alan Gernon mentions that in his book as well. So again, I've looked at Alan's book, and that's been an inspiration. It's actually been a good validation for me, in the sense that the way I had carved out my method, and then the way I've then further tailored that to those specific industries that I cater for, so from high net worth individuals to sports professionals or those in the media space, there is an element which is unique for each of those types of individuals. And where I've honed in with footballers is to try and ensure that they have every much of a likelihood of success post-career, and that nothing is completely riding on the career itself in terms of their quality of life, and the satisfaction that they experience post-career. That's probably as much as I will share with you for today. As always, I'm very grateful for your support, for your feedback. Please do use the comments box below to provide that feedback. Let me know what your thoughts are for this particular video. Please do stay engaged, and if there's any additional questions that you feel would be useful for me to answer, again, use the comments box below, add your questions, and then I can add those in as additional videos and answer the questions as part of this series. And I'd be very grateful for you to continue supporting me, liking my videos, and please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I will have, as I've mentioned already, additional videos coming through, planned to hone in a similar way that I have done today with football players, but I will speak specifically around celebrities in the media space through to businessmen and high net worth individuals, businesswomen as well, of course. So please watch out for my next set of videos. Again, otherwise, thank you very much for your support and for your time, and I look forward to catching you in the next video. Take care until then. Bye-bye.